From all of the anomalies, nothing puts a bigger smile on my face than Deep Roots. For most players, this is just your run-of-the-mill defensive anomaly, but on closer inspection, you can find a treasure chest of crazy interactions. But before we start, researching and making these videos is a ton of work, so why not subscribe to this channel? It's free, it helps out a ton, and you stay up to date with all of the weird stuff TFT has to offer. Speaking of weird stuff, let's talk about all the insane things you can do with one of the greatest anomalies ever made. The description of Deep Roots goes like this: gain 700 health, 25 armor and 25 magic resist. The user cannot move or be stunned and pull their target into range. In short, it gives a bunch of tank stats, CC immunity, and has the downside of your unit not being allowed to move and having to pull enemies into range if nobody is nearby. Because of this, the most common use for Deep Roots is to use it as a defensive anomaly for your main tank. If you compare it to something like Giant Sized, it offers quite similar stats. It can make a lot of sense to simply take Deep Roots to strengthen your front line and avoid wasting your gold. Having your main tank be immune to crowd control can also be quite useful to ensure they always get to cast their ability. As for the second part about pulling units into range, this mechanic is a bit misunderstood. The pull only happens if there is no auto attack target in range. This means if you put Deep Roots on a range carry in the backline and that unit has someone in range, then nothing will happen. For example, this long Nocturne has a lot of range because of rapid fire cannon and fishbones. He is actually an okayish option for Deep Roots because he should always have a target in range and he will never waste his time by pulling someone close to him. In this case, the anomaly mainly acts as a way to grant him CC immunity and a bunch of defensive stats. Things start to become a lot more interesting once you put Deep Roots on a melee unit, but you don't position it in the front line. Since there is no viable target in range, an enemy unit gets pulled down and once it's taken out, the next unit is pulled. But how does the game decide which unit gets pulled? The answer is whoever the unit would path towards. This opens up the potential for pathing manipulation. For example, you can position your front line in a way to block every frontline hex except the top right, and this will guarantee that the unit on the very far right gets pulled towards the Deep Root user. In concept, this is quite similar to the full mana Leona tech from set 8, where you intentionally left a gap in your front line so she would cast her infinite laser on the enemy main tank. While Deep Roots isn't as powerful, you can use this concept to intentionally pull the enemy main tank wherever you want. One potential application for this tech involves Rumble. He shoots 5 missiles and gets refunded 20 mana for everyone that misses. You can combine this with a family, a visionary or a dominator emblem and create a setup that will make Rumble permacast. This can either be used to focus down specific frontline units or to stack ability power, since all of his upgrades have pretty good scaling. Now you might think this tech can be easily countered because you can just place a Quicksilver in the front line. Funnily enough, this doesn't actually work. Even though the pull is clearly a form of crowd control, it ignores the CC immunity from Quicksilver and it will pull the unit into the backline. Though it gets a bit weird when two Deep Roots players face each other. Since the anomaly returns the unit to the initial position, both will continue to try to pull each other and you can potentially end up with a tie in the worst case scenario. But if you think this is weird, we haven't even scratched the surface. Introducing everyone's favorite support item, Zephyr. Since Deep Root is based on pathing, I figured I could combine this with Zephyr and try to pull the enemy corner across the entire map. While this would have made for a great visual, I stumbled upon something that I didn't expect. The unit that gets hit by Zephyr is still a viable target to get pulled. However, the unit is currently not viable as an auto attack target, so Deep Root procs again and pulls down a second unit.
Okay, so here it should Zephyr him and probably pull the set, right? Wait, it pulled the Zephyr? And then it pulled another? Wait, it pulled both. Interesting. I learned something new today.
In a perfect world, where you have a second deep root from another anomaly or a second Zephyr, you could potentially pull down 3 enemy frontliners and create a huge gap for your own melee carries. If all of this sounds too complicated for you, there is a much easier solution. All you need for this is the artifact Spectral Cutlass. You can use it to teleport your deep root user into the enemy backline, which has some rather hilarious consequences. For starters, your units have a set target at the start of combat. This causes the enemy frontliner to get pulled into your backline where your deep root user started the fight. After 8 seconds are over and the unit returns, the initial target in the enemy backline will now get pulled back all the way across your board to the original starting position. If you get lucky against an unprepared opponent, this allows you to bypass the enemy frontline and take down the enemy carry. Another artifact that can be surprisingly funny with deep root is Horizon Focus. It deals 30% of the enemy's max health as magic damage every time the holder crowd controls an enemy unit. This sounds somewhat useful to deal some bonus damage with every pull, but what if we create a setup with an infinite amount of pulls? By cornering a melee unit in the bottom right, you create a setup that causes the deep root user to never get into auto attack range. This means you can create a continuous pull that will proc Horizon Focus every single time. There are also other ways to make use of the self-root effect. Some of them are positive and some of them are quite useless. For example, if you're playing the hero augment for Singed or Aurelia, you should avoid deep roots at all costs. Singed will stand still, only poisoning a single unit, while Aurelia will be unable to deal any damage. On the other hand, if you're looking for a ridiculous setup, then look no further than the Sniper Deep Root Sevika. When Sevika rolls the flamethrower, it scales with her range, making items like Sniper Emblem or Sniper's Focus incredibly valuable on her. Unfortunately, her punch makes her dash towards the front line. Now she gets quickly targeted by the enemy carries and you lose out on all of the bonus damage. This can be fixed by rooting her in place. Every time Sevika rolls the punch, the anomaly will simply pull her back into safety. This gives you more chances to roll the flamethrower and win the fight by burning down the entire enemy board. So far, most of the examples have been rather reasonable. I think it's time to dig deep and see how far these roots can go. If you want to truly dazzle your opponents, then Smeech is the way to go. Usually Smeech tries to jump towards the furthest itemless unit within 4 hexes, but you can completely break this ability by rooting him in place. Especially when he resets his jump, it's possible for him to jump across the entire board like a bad Five Nights at Freddy jump scare.
Wait, how's my speech doing? I didn't check. And you guys were doubting! You guys were doubters!
In theory, you can push this even further with a Firelight emblem and the augment Aerial Warfare. This augment causes Firelight units to gain AD and AP for every hex traveled, and since he will jump and get pulled back, he can end up with a ton of bonus stats under the right circumstances. Now, I've already gone into detail what you can do with 1 deep root, but what about 2? If you take the augment, another anomaly in stage 4-2, this grants you an item you can place on any unit to receive a second deep root effect. Obviously, everyone has the same idea when they hear this. Can you play ping pong in TFT? I'm happy to announce, yes, this is in fact possible. By positioning both of your deep root units in the backline and both of them have the same target, they will keep pulling the unit left and right. This also gave me another idea, a potential solution to finally make Echo stop inting. Don't get me wrong, Echo can be quite fun, but nothing is as infuriating as having him jump into the enemy backline, get the enemy carry low, and then he dashes back to the front line without finishing the job. What is the solution? A delayed deep root. You wait for Echo to jump into the backline, and then you give him the portable anomaly to root him in the enemy backline. Now it truly saddens me to say this, but this plan did not work as intended. Echo will receive all of the bonus stats and he is rooted in place, but unfortunately the pull animation doesn't work at all. Once there's no unit in attack range anymore, he becomes a sitting duck and is more useless than before. It looks like for the time being, you want to put the item on your unit before combat starts to ensure that nothing bugs out. While I could talk about deep root all day long, I hopefully gave you some fun ideas on how to play around with this anomaly beyond putting it on your main tank for some defensive stats. I'm curious to learn which deep root tech is your personal favorite. Let me know in the comments. I hope you learned something and see you next time.